This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by Hecna, now live on Kickstarter.
From the brilliant publisher behind Humblewood and the Deck of Many, Hecna is a whimsical, dark carnival setting for 5th edition.
It presents a full campaign for characters level 1 through 10 filled with dark fantasy and fun, campy escapades.
Hecna features incredible artwork depicting charmingly macabre monsters and delightfully twisted adventures from some of the top creators in the RPG world.
You can even experience the world of the Revalia today by downloading the latest version of Hecna for free at the Deck of Many website.
Then follow the links in the description below to visit their campaign on Kickstarter.
And now, on to this week's episode. Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin, and we are the Dungeon Dudes.
Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we're going to chat about how to use Milestone leveling in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
Milestone leveling has become increasingly popular, especially in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. It's an alternative to tracking experience or other forms of character progression.
Now, there's a couple pros and cons to using Milestone leveling instead of tracking experience points. So today, we're going to talk about what those pros and cons are, how to use Milestone leveling in your games, and how to kind of find the right balance for whether or not you're going to use this at your table. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling.
So to kick things off, the first question that we need to ask is, what is milestone leveling and how does it work? The main idea here is that instead of having to worry about tracking XP, the DM simply gets to say, you level up, and you do.
One of the nice advantages of milestone leveling is that there's nothing to track. The Dungeon Master doesn't have to worry about that situation where you get text messages from the party after the game saying, hey, we forgot to do XP. How much XP did we earn last night? And then you have to go back and count out all the monsters that the party defeated and all the quests and objectives that they completed and all the treasure that they found and add it all up and figure out how to divide it amongst the party and do all that extra math and calculations, which admittedly can be fun and interesting, but can also result in a lot of extra and unwanted bookkeeping.
Many of the official Dungeons & Dragons modules actually have milestone leveling built into their system that kind of inform you when you should be leveling up the party. And sometimes it works really, really well, and sometimes it doesn't. The key thing to keep in mind, if you're a Dungeon Master designing a leveling system based on milestones, is when is the right time narratively to add in all of these elements and to let your characters level up. The books often go by a chapter-by-chapter basis, which can work really, really well. But sometimes you find yourselves in a chapter for a very, very long time, and the players are always wondering, when do I level up?
Yeah, there's a certain pacing that players want from leveling up. If the players level up too quickly with a milestone system, for example, if they level up every other session or multiple times a session, it can feel like they don't have enough time to grow into their abilities, like things are just moving far too quickly. On the flip side, sometimes it can feel like forever between levels, and the players don't really know or understand what they have to do or what they have to accomplish in order to gain a level. They might think that they have earned a level from all the things that they've accomplished in the campaign to this point, but if they don't gain that level, they can feel unrewarded or unrecognized, as if all the experiences that their characters went through were kind of meaningless. So there's a little bit of an art to finding the right pacing of how to use milestone leveling and when to set the benchmarks in your campaign to get the exact right mix.
One of the tricky pitfalls of using XP instead of milestone is that when you're tracking XP, you can run into the problem where you're padding the adventure, trying to add in extra monsters, extra combat encounters, random encounters, in an attempt to get the players to level appropriately. On the opposite side, you can also add in too much XP because maybe the players are well equipped and handling monsters well above their weight class, in which case suddenly they're leveling up too fast. Because of these, it can actually be a little tricky to navigate. And by using the milestone system, what you're actually doing is putting it into you, the Dungeon Master's hands, to dictate when the appropriate time to level up is.
You can always do other things with experience points, like awarding experience points for role-playing, or completing quests, or finding secret locations. There's lots of creative ways to do this, and we've actually talked about that in a whole video. When you use a milestone system, you don't have to worry about this kind of very fine, granular sort of planning. You simply get to deal with things in very broad strokes and general terms, and that can be very freeing depending on the type and tone of campaign that you're running.
So that brings us to our next question. When should your players reach a milestone? Is it at the end of every encounter, or when they discover a new dungeon or defeat a boss monster? Let's look at some of the narrative elements that we want to pay attention to when deciding when our players should level up.
When I think about where I want to place milestones when I'm designing my campaigns, I think about both what the player's overarching goal is, the entire arc of the entire campaign, but I also think about all the steps that they need to achieve to make up that major goal. Oftentimes, a big quest, like destroying the One Ring or slaying the dragon of Icespire Peak, can actually be broken up into many smaller but significant chunks along the way. For example, the players might have to find the dragon-slaying sword, or they might have to cross an incredible sea or ocean or a dangerous forest. They might have to venture down into 1 or 2 dungeons, or even negotiate an alliance with a king. All of these things feed into their overall goal, and they're significant points and significant accomplishments that it feels appropriate to reward each of those things with a milestone.
For me, the best time to reward the players with a milestone level up is at the end of one of these little adventures. Once they've completed a major task, you give them a new level. That way it kind of feeds into a reward for completing that task, and the players can kind of see it coming. And this is actually important. Rather than having your players constantly asking, when am I going to level up? They know that they're on the mission to find the dragon slaying sword, and they can safely assume that once they complete that mission, they're going to be able to be rewarded with an additional level, which can be really exciting. And it means that as they set out for their next adventure, they have new skills and abilities to play around with. I also think that once you award them a milestone level up is a great time to follow that up with some downtime. Now that they've leveled up, they can use their downtime to prepare for their next adventure, and you get that moment where they can ease into whatever's coming next, which is going to be a slightly harder challenge than the last thing they faced now that they've leveled up. But they get to prepare to use their new abilities and skills or new spells or whatever they gained from their last adventure and their last level up on their new one.
Remember, the name for a milestone itself comes from marking the road along a path to a major location. A milestone isn't something that you reach when you get to the city. A milestone is something that you pass by on the path to get there. So milestones need to be broken up into smaller objectives, and if you're tying the milestones to the big quest, it's probably going to create too large of a gap in between. The milestones are things that happen along the way, but oftentimes they still need to be things that happen at logical breakpoints and rest points. Things like a fork in the road, or when the players can stop and rest. One of the other interesting things that you can do with this is that this allows the players to have a little bit of agency of their own in determining what those milestones might be. If your players are embarking on a very open-ended or sandbox-style campaign where they have a really, really big goal, perhaps a goal such as mapping out an entire wilderness, well, once they've made a significant contribution to mapping out that wilderness, that's a good point to award them a milestone.
That also leads to the other important fact that it does need to be a clear point. You don't want to be awarding a milestone level up in the middle of a dungeon or in the middle of an adventure. Just because they slew a handful of bandits, but they haven't found the bandit captain yet, might not be the best time to award a milestone. If they're on the hunt for the bandit captain, make the milestone happen once they reach and defeat that bandit captain, not halfway through that adventure.
If you really want to go freeform and not worry about things so much, you might even offer your players several objectives simultaneously and allow them to determine how they're going to achieve those objectives and what order. For example, you might take the classic Elemental Temples archetype and say the players have to obtain an artifact from a fire, water, air, and earth temple, all of which are built for characters of approximately the same level. The players can attempt those on any order. The first 2 are going to be pretty hard. The second 2 maybe less so, and maybe you make some changes and responses to the world itself to make the other ones a little bit more difficult. But this gave the players the ability to choose what order they wanted to do things in, how they wanted to solve them, and let the world respond. But the goals were always clear from the very start of the arc.
So the other part of this question is, how often should your players be rewarded with a milestone level up? Well, this depends on where they are in the campaign setting, what the adventure is that they're setting out on, but there are some expectations that the players are going to have around how often they're going to want to level up and how the progression of the game is going to feel.
We can look at the XP charts in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and compare those against the XP value of monsters that are appropriate to the character's level to actually figure out a rough guide that we can map onto milestone leveling. It turns out that in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, first and second level player characters actually level up after completing about 5 or 6 encounters, basically a single adventuring day. But once characters reach level 3 and are looking at gaining level 4, 5, 6 to 10, the rules of D&D actually make it look like they have to go through anywhere from 12 to 16 combat encounters, which would roughly break into about 3 to 5 adventuring days. If we map out adventuring days onto the number of game sessions that we actually play together at the table, we can kind of use this as a rough guideline. Characters at level 1 and 2 gain a level after a single game session. But once characters hit level 3, we might want to have them level up maybe once every 3 to 6 game sessions. Until about 13th level, where we might want to either slow things down a little bit more and have it be between 4 and 8 game sessions, or where you might want to speed things up a little bit more. Me personally, I think the fastest I would level characters up would be at least 3 game sessions, because I think that that's the appropriate amount of time that it takes the players to get used to the new abilities that they earned from leveling up, and doesn't necessarily overwhelm the players with their characters leveling up so quickly that they don't even learn the spells that they've earned.
One thing to keep in mind is that when players are learning a new character that they're embarking on and they're leveling up with that character, they want time to try out the new abilities, skills, and spells that they've gained by leveling up. By giving them the 3 to 5 sessions, you're actually giving them enough combat encounters, maybe some social interactions and exploration encounters where they get to try out these new elements as well as solidify the previous elements that they've already been playing around with. In this way, you kind of get to build your character up, learn how it works, and especially for newer players, this can be really important. So I don't like the idea of speeding things up too much, because you really want your players to dig into what they can do with the new abilities that they've gained. There is another idea out there, that is that you use the amount of sessions for the level that they are going to gain. So at level 1, you play 1 session and you gain you go up to level 2. Now you have to play 2 sessions to go to level 3, and so forth and so on. And it keeps going up by 1 session each time. This can work really, really well, but at the same time, once you get to a very high-end game, it might start to drag. But if that is the way that works for you, it is an option that's out there, and it can be relatively straightforward and easy for everybody to figure out.
Now, of course, this can feel a little bit inorganic, and so we don't want to use this as a hard and fast, ironclad rule. We don't want to let milestone leveling turn our entire campaign into a very strict railroad, where the player characters are always doing X, Y, Z and gaining a level in lockstep every 4 game sessions. We need to use our discretion as dungeon masters to determine when it is appropriate and turn it back over to the players to see them invent objectives for their characters and figure out open-ended solutions to the problems and scenarios that they're presented with. They might even choose the scenarios that they're presented with. So if the milestone leveling that we're talking about here starts to sound really, really railroady, that is actually a legitimate risk and a legitimate bit of criticism of milestone leveling as a whole, is that it makes things feel less open-ended. And the way to solve that is to make the goals and objectives and the conditions under which the players gain a level more explicit and give them more control over determining what those objectives and the solutions to them are.
The other thing here is that when we look at the 3 to 5 sessions to level up, keep in mind that your table could be vastly different. I know that sometimes I set out a quest that I think is going to be completed in 1 or 2 nights, and it takes us 4 to 5 sessions to actually complete that quest. in which case, okay, maybe now's a good time to do a milestone system. Other times it might take them 10 sessions, and other times it might take them 2. So there is a little bit of leniency that you need to impart into this idea, where the narrative and the quests and adventures that your characters go on should be more important than any sort of structure that you've put in place for how you think things are going to go. Because we all know that as dungeon masters, whatever plans we lay out are going to get utterly destroyed by the players. So stop planning so much and just leave this as a loose concept, saying, oh, it's been quite a few sessions, we should probably build to a climax soon and get them to level up. Or, you know, they've only been playing for 1 or 2 sessions, maybe we should add a little bit more to this narrative before they level up.
So as long as the milestones are tied to the narrative goals and objectives, you can free yourself from the structure. It's just that you know also you're going to get a sense as you run more games for your group of how fast they progress through certain things. They're always going to surprise you, but this will give you an approximate gauge that you can use to figure out how much you need to plan and how much you should pack into the quests and objectives and scenarios that they're being presented with. If the scenario turns out to be really, really complicated and maybe you can break it into smaller objectives, then maybe that's appropriate as well.
Beyond the potential of turning your campaign into a little bit of a railroad, another pitfall of milestones is that you lose the reward that XP offers. A lot of players enjoy getting XP because it feels like a reward on top of treasure and magic items and gold and all of that. So we're removing the XP from this. So what are you going to give the players besides treasure and magic items to make them feel like their mission was valuable?
One of the unintended side effects of using milestone leveling that I found for myself was that it did make me question the purpose of throwaway combat encounters that only existed to create a combat challenge to the player characters. One of the things that I learned was that the story is its own reward. The narrative is its own reward. And so by using milestone leveling, I found myself as a dungeon master, I wanted to make sure that every encounter and every scenario that I presented to my players had meaningful stakes and advanced the narrative, the story, or the plots or the objectives of the player characters in some way. So even though I wasn't giving out XP because, hey, great, you killed those 4 goblins, it became, hey, great, you stopped that goblin from warning its allies and thus saved the village. And so every combat encounter and every scenario that I presented had a little bit more meaning and story relevance to it, and that itself was its own reward.
If the players aren't satisfied with the story as its own reward, and let's be honest, a lot of players love treasure, then you might want to look at things like gold, or possibly the ability to buy magic items. In their downtime, once they've gained a level, they can go shop for a new magic item and use the treasure that they've gained to acquire it. You could also look at something like feats or other boons to award your players as an option instead of having to rely on XP as that great reward.
One of the interesting things that you can do with treasure is detach the biggest treasure find in the adventure from the end of the adventure. Oftentimes what happens is the biggest pile of gold and the biggest pile of XP always happen when the players complete the biggest objective. But something that can be kind of interesting with changing this is that actually maybe the biggest and most special treasure find rewards the players for looking in an unexpected place or trying something new in a different way. And that reward comes at a different point than the end of the adventure.
And if all of that isn't enough, never forget to reward good role-playing with inspiration. It can be a really valuable reward to give a player to let them know that they've done a great job. And all of this kind of helps fill that gap that removing XP leaves. And when they do finish the adventure and they gain that milestone level, that is a reward unto itself as well. So by peppering in all of these little rewards throughout the adventure, throughout the campaign, they're going to feel constantly rewarded and like they're constantly getting positive feedback for the quests and adventures that they've set out on. And that's going to mean that it still feels like it's in the players' hands who are driving the story and pushing towards those narrative moments where they're going to be able to level up.
Ultimately, that is one of the biggest advantages of milestone leveling. It makes everything so much more freeform and flexible, as long as you're remembering to let the narrative the player-directed narrative drive the objectives and the outcomes. It encourages us to think about every encounter as how it fits into the player's goals, what they want to achieve, and what they want to accomplish, rather than just saying, yes, great, you defeated the orcs, you defeated the ogre, here is 50 XP. The result of this was that I found switching to milestone leveling did give me some freedom and flexibility to make sure that every encounter that I designed had really good narrative stakes and was meaningful in some way to the players. And as a result of this, it increased the amount of role-playing at my table. And so I do think that if you do take this objective, narrative, goal-based focus in designing your adventures and encounters, milestone leveling might really, really work well for you and encourage more role-playing at your table.
Now keep in mind that some tables might still enjoy the idea of tracking XP, the characters might enjoy receiving XP as a reward, and it might be the most fun at your table setting. Perhaps you're running a campaign that is very heavily focused on combat encounters, and that's what your players like, in which case the XP system might be the right system for you. These are simply some ideas to help improve what is becoming, we would say, the more popular option of milestone leveling in Dungeons & Dragons. But both XP and milestone remain very valid options for you DMs out there setting forth on a new adventure and trying to decide which option you might use to level up your characters.
Whichever option you do choose, there are going to be challenges in making sure that the players feel properly rewarded and that you keep good pacing and overall structure in your entire campaign. Both XP and milestone leveling have their own advantages, and figuring out exactly what that pacing and what that structure is for your campaign is going to help you determine which of these two systems is right for you.
So this has been a look at how to run milestone leveling in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tell us whether you prefer milestone or XP in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity and ingenuity of our Patreon supporters. A big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters out there, and particularly to Godric, who asked the question of how to use milestone leveling in our Discord channel exclusively for our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we create here on YouTube and want to help contribute to what we create here, please consider checking us out on Patreon by following the links in the description below.
And don't forget to check out our live play Shadows of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/dungeon_dudes. You can find all the previous episodes of that campaign right up over here.
And we've got plenty more tips and tricks for Dungeon Masters for 5th edition D&D right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
in the dungeon.